Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground is brought to you by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Common Ground is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota. Hi, and welcome to Common Ground. I'm your host, Ashley Hall. On this week's episode of Common Ground, Mackenzie Lindahl, a photographer from Bemidji, talks about her exhibit of organic produce from Harmony Foods. We visit the Pioneer Village Schoolhouse in Nisswa to see a one-room schoolhouse preserved. Plus, Mary Morton, an artist from Bemidji, demonstrates the ethnic art of Ukrainian egg decorating.
I'm Mackenzie Lindahl, and this is my show Ingredients at the Wild Hare Bistro. I like to document the foods that I like to use. I like to capture the local ingredients that I am inspired by the most. Photographic images are something that I can trust. When I share with others, they get it. They get me. They get the experience. And specifically with food photography, I mean, food, everybody needs it, everybody seems to love it. It's really just a way to connect. I've been taking pictures of food for several years now, ever since I have been working at the Wild Hare Bistro. We are really focused on making food look as good as it tastes. I think that's one of our passions here. I think it's really fun to take pictures of moments in time, Easter dinner, everyone at the table, or maybe the first time I ever made mashed potatoes. I have that photo, you know, and it's really special to me. And so to have the photos of particular ingredients like those onions that I got at the co-op, you know, 2 years ago that I made those potatoes with, I have that photo too, and it's just, it kind of reminds me who I am. It's kind of like being reminded of maybe not even the actual experience of eating it, but being reminded of how much you love carrots. My favorite ingredients are ones that come from here. Ones that I know the span of their life. I know where they came from. I know who grew them. And I know how to use them to create something really special, really unique, that will just satisfy. It's a visual experience of a more interior experience, more a daily experience for me, because I do cook lunch for many people, and I do order cheese and help people find the most tasty item for their entertaining experiences that they have to put together. Photography kind of fills in that, like, that two-dimensional aspect, that this is pretty, this is just gorgeous. I present people many sandwiches. You know, here's your sandwich. But it's nice to step back and put the images up and say, here's some color. Here's some color to enjoy as well. And this is where your sandwich came from. And these are the kinds of things I think about when I'm preparing it. One of the avenues that brought me into taking pictures of food is that I've worked at Harmony Co-op for about 9 years. I've been so inspired by the products that we sell there and the local farmers and produce. Often I've taken pictures of the new raspberries that come in when they're in season, or the farmer bringing in asparagus. And I always end up going home from work that day with that ingredient and making dinner with it. And so each season becomes very memorable to me. I always find that the raw ingredients themselves, like the chard in the garden with the setting sun turn out the best, because it's almost like a perfect shape. You know, you don't have to do anything to it. I'm often inspired by one thing, and I'll bring home from the grocery store 6 different items that have no business being in the same shopping cart, because they sound good or look good or are extra bright or really shiny or whatever. But usually those make the best dishes too. I like to take pictures of things that go with other things too. Pears are great, but they go better with cheese. And when you look at that photo hanging on your dining room table and you think about a really great cheese that'll go with it, that's awesome. I mean, that's part of the experience. These are some of the maple trees that are in my yard, and last fall they just went beautiful colors. And in the spring in northern Minnesota, I have many friends that syrup. And so often I'll get a jar of syrup from somebody, and that's definitely one of my staple pantry ingredients. I think lots of people have a artistic way about themselves that may not necessarily be visual. Maybe it is the way they gather their family for the holidays. Maybe it's the way they collect a special ingredient that they can only find in northern Minnesota. Or maybe it's capturing a seasonal moment. But my way of sharing that appreciation is through serving others and then sharing something beautiful with them.
We're here today at Nisswa's Pioneer Village, and we're in front of what is probably our most popular attraction. Children that come here love this little red schoolhouse. Even though they go to a school with computers and all the modern conveniences, they are fascinated by this. The school actually was called the Pillager School, which means, of course, that it was in Pillager, Minnesota, and it was moved here. It was built in 1896, and it operated as a school until 1950. That meant either to come in from school or to come in from recess. So if you come in, you first enter the cloakroom. This is where the children would have congregated and come in first in the morning. You'll see the wood box is over here. This had to be well kept and well stocked with wood for the stove during the day. If you look at this floor, you can see where they were chopping wood and where they split the wood, and they didn't always meet the piece of wood they were trying to split. Sometimes they hit the floor instead. So that to us is very interesting. A little bit about the school itself. If you noticed, it was red. The thing about a country school is everybody donated either their time, their money, or the leftover materials that they had around their farm. In the case of the red paint, of course, that was the red paint left over from the barn. The labor was always donated. The land would be donated. One farmer would give a small portion of his quarter section or whatever he had on the street, and that's where they would build the school. All the people built it, pitched in together. Over here is an interesting thing about country schools. Most of them were prototypes, and if you see this picture here, that is a prototype exactly like this school. The boys in the school would be very old in terms of what the grade they were at, because they would have to leave early to get in to take in the crops. They would have to start late to do the opposite. And this was something interesting in my own family. My grandfather was a great kidder, and he always said that he couldn't learn anything, so he married the teacher, which in fact he did. And my grandmother had an actual degree. A lot of the people teaching in these schools had just certificates or whatever, had gone 6 weeks or whatever. My grandmother, for that day, which was in the late 1800s, actually had a degree. So I could never figure out how he could say he had married the teacher, and later when they both died, I saw they were both about the same age. Well, that was the same thing. He had to go and take care of the crops in the beginning and the end of the year. We're now in the back of the schoolroom proper, and I wanted to mention just a few things about the teachers and the decorum that they were intended to follow, expected to follow. A teacher could not get married during the school year. If she did, her contract would be terminated. Here's some rules for teachers, and it's interesting. It tells what they were supposed to do. Teachers will fill the lamps, clean chimneys each day. Men teachers may take one evening each week for courting purposes, or 2 evenings a week if they go to church regularly. After 10 hours in school, the teachers may spend the remaining time reading the Bible or other good books. Women teachers who marry or engage in unseemly conduct will be dismissed, and there are a number of other rules like this. As I said, my grandmother was a teacher. When she married my grandfather, out the door, but she was favorite teacher around, but they couldn't keep her or wouldn't maintain her contract any longer. We're in the main schoolroom now, and you can see the way this is set up. Remember, there would be 1 through 8 grades in here. The older students would study on this side of the room. The younger would be on the other. And if you notice, you can see the smaller desks that graduate basically to much larger desks. The larger desks could hold 2 students if need be. From this vantage point in the room, you can see what we have up there. First of all, we have the stove, very important to a country school like this, because it was very difficult to heat this drafty old barn. In fact, many times they would cancel school between January and February during the coldest months. That's an interesting stove there, because you'll notice it takes advantage of the gases 3 times. The fire is in the lower box. The smoke or gas would proceed to the box just above it, and then it proceeds to the top box, which gives out heat 3 times from the same gas. The way this would be conducted is the teacher, of course, has her desk there in the corner. She would do the different classes individually. In other words, maybe there was only 1 class in the 1st grade. She would bring that student up, and they would sit at the stool that you can see in front of her desk, and she would go over their lesson with them. Once that's done, they would go back and the next student would come, and so on. The older students would actually help the younger students. The books that you see on the desks here, paper was very expensive. So rather than use paper, they would have these slates, which basically is a piece of slate that was bordered with a board, and they would write with chalk on this and then erase it when they wanted to do something else. So each child used to have a slate of its own. So you can see how patriotic these students were. There's a picture of Lincoln up there, picture of Washington here. So they would learn a lot about just their immediate area, their state, and anything that should be known toward the patriotism of the country. When we started out with this school and everything was new, the lighting was strictly by lamp. The building was always situated such that the sun would give the windows plenty of light during the day. In fact, you will have some schools that have windows on only one side of the room, because that's the side where the light from the sun came in the most. This school does have windows on both sides so that you would have it as it swung around during the day. The thing they wanted was their children to have a good education, and they gave their time, their money, their possessions and everything else to make sure that they had a good school district. And they all pitched in. They would paint the schoolhouse probably once a year, maybe not that much, but whether it needed it or not, because they were very proud of their school. And in a small district like this, that was the one thing that they had to be proud of.
Hi, I'm Mary Morton, and I'm going to demonstrate Ukrainian egg decorating, or known as pasanki. The pasanki was always done by the women, and they would get together and spend the day making these beautiful eggs in the spring. It started off as a spring celebration before Christianity. And when the Christianity came in, then they adopted a lot of the symbols over to that. You see a lot of spiders and sunshine shapes on these. Spiders were thought to be good luck. This would be a sample of a spider or a sunshine. The eggs are done with beeswax and a tool called a kiska. The old style kiskas are copper rolled around into make a little funnel and wired on with copper wire on a piece of wood. And in recent times we have gone to the electric kiskas, which are like this. With the electric one, we have to use colored beeswax, and they dye it black. The ladies that used to do these back in the Ukraine, when they would get together, they would spend the entire day doing these because they had to do enough eggs to last the entire year. These eggs are raw and saved just for their beauty. They believed that they brought good luck. They would give them to a newborn baby. They would put an egg in the casket of a family member or a friend who had died. They would bury some in the ground out in the fields because it was supposed to ensure a good crop. They would put one underneath the beehive so that they would get lots of honey. They would put them in the barn to protect the animals and to protect the barn from fire or lightning. They would also put one above their door in their home to protect the people who lived inside and to protect their house from fire. As you can see, there's a lot of different colors, range from light yellow to black. And as you can see, if you're lucky, the black comes out very black. It's done on a brown or blue egg, one of the colored eggs like this, so the background colors are not actually white. They're the color of the egg. And then it's got the blue and black. And sometimes you get what they call happy mistakes because the shells take colors differently. And this fish is supposed to be in water, and it kind of turned out like water. And when they did the eggs, the mostly dark ones, like that one or this one, were usually saved to put in a casket or given to an older person because it symbolized that it was a life written upon. And these would symbolize the gates to heaven along with the Trinity, the three triangle. But if you were giving one to a newborn baby, you would use one like one of these with a lot of white on it because it symbolized a clean slate waiting to be written upon. So I dry the eggs. You could blow them out too, but then you'd have to seal the ends when you dye them. Otherwise the dye would soak inside of the shell and then you would lose the effect. So I just dry them out, and you can hear the hollow egg inside. Well, it's not hollow, it's hardened inside, and it's the yolk, and it just dries up, shrivels up, and will keep indefinitely. Our tradition of coloring Easter eggs originates from the Ukraine. These were just done to keep, to give. They would frequently have them blessed by the church. The girls would pick their prettiest egg and give to the boy that they thought was the cutest or the nicest, the one they hoped would pay attention to them. The boys used to like to see who got the most beautiful eggs. And then the eggs that nobody liked, they sometimes would play games with, and the boys would, well, I guess all of the kids would, they would play a game of toss the egg back and forth and see who was the last one to be able to catch the whole egg. When they had the broken shells, the girls would take those shells down to the river, and they would toss them into the river. And if the eggshells sank in the river, then they were out of luck for the year. They weren't going to find a boyfriend. But if the shells floated across the river, then their love was going to come from across the river. And if they floated downstream, well, then he was coming from somewhere downstream. So when you start off to do an egg design, they're mostly geometric, and you will start off by dividing your egg in half this way, in half this way, and in half this way. And then you have your sections from which you can then go to this egg here and put in the sections like that, which would be this one, by doing a meridian line around that way and this way, and then doing parallel lines to those. So it's really much easier than it looks. We'll do the basic triangle design or star shape. So we're going to do a line starting there and just laying the wax on. And the hotter the wax, the better it'll flow. And if you drop wax on your egg, it becomes part of the design because you cannot remove it. Even scratching it off isn't going to help. Now when I go to buy eggs to do this with, I'm the person you see in the grocery store going through the eggs and checking them before I buy them, because I don't want any with flaws in, because that will be the point at which they'll crack. And when I get them home, I go through my eggs and I candle them. And people who lived on farms know that that means that they hold them up to the light and look through the shell. So I hold mine up to the light and I look, and you can see little dark lines that would be a flaw in the shell. And if I find flaws in them, then those are the ones I use to cook with. And the ones that have perfect shells, I put back in the egg carton and I put them away to dry. Now the eggs will dry out depending on the thickness of the shell. Could take anywhere from a year to several years. And I let them dry, and the insides will become hard. And some of these that I have, you can actually feel they're very light. One of them I picked up here earlier, you could hear it, it shook. And it's just the insides that are loose in there. So once you have all of the white lines on, then you would dye it into the next color, and it should be the next lighter color in your line, possibly the yellow or orange color. Okay, so what is on covered black now will remain white because the dye will not soak into the shell where there is wax. So on this egg, all of this was covered in black wax that's white, and then it was dyed into pink. And then the pink was filled in. What's pink here now was covered with black wax. And then it was dyed into the purple. And after the purple then all the wax was removed, and then you see the pink and the white underneath. So as you're doing these eggs, you have to think in reverse, because what you're doing first is the lightest color, but you're working from lightest to darkest, and yet what you see, you're putting the dark on, but it's really the light. Now this one was done with the dyed wax, so the black is not as black, but when you go to take the wax off, then you will actually see the design. The thing I enjoy the most about Ukrainian egg decorating is when the final dye is on and you can take the wax off and see the beautiful design that you've made underneath. It's always a surprise. It's never quite what you expect.
Thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you enjoyed the show, and we look forward to seeing you next week right here on Common Ground. If you have a segment idea for Common Ground pertaining to North Central Minnesota, contact us at legacy@lptv.org or call us at 218-333-3022. To view this episode or any Common Ground segment, visit us at lptv.org/Common Ground. For individual segments or copies of Common Ground, please call 218-333-3020. Common Ground is funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4th, 2008. If you enjoyed this segment of Lakeland Public Television's Common Ground, consider making a contribution at lptv.org.